The fun part about this necklace is that I have to make sure the S is showing, or else I'm sending a very different message. Hey guys, it's Sabrina. Today I'm going to be sharing with you all of the books that I've read so far in 2021. I haven't had a chance to do any reading wrap-ups yet, so I figured this would be a good way to get it all out of the way in one go. I have read 30 books so far, so I'm going to try to keep the descriptions very short. So with that, let's get started. The first book that I read in January was Chasing the Harvest, Migrant Workers in California Agriculture, which was edited by Gabrielle Thompson. This is a collection of first-hand accounts from migrant farm workers, and it details the hardships that they face. I think this is a really important read because these stories often go unnoticed. I really liked it and I gave it 4 stars. After that, I forgot the name for a second, Rhythm of War by Brandon Sanderson. This is the 4th book in his Stormlight Archive series, which is like a really long, epic high fantasy series. I'm not going to even bother trying to explain it, but this was a great way to start the year and I give it 5 stars. This is my favorite book series. This next one is a little weird. The 36-Hour Day, A Family Guide to Caring for People Who Have Alzheimer's Disease by Nancy L. Mace and Peter V. Robbins. I have a grandmother and I love her, so I read this. It was very helpful. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read The Queen's Rising by Rebecca Ross. This is a young adult fantasy. It takes place in a school setting where the students have to master a certain passion in order to get a patron. This was really repetitive, I did not like it, and I gave it 1 star. After that, I read Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. This is a dark academia novel that follows a secret society at Yale that deals with the occult. I really liked it and I gave it 5 stars. After that, I read Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is a really popular historical fiction novel. It's set during the reign of Henry VIII and it follows Thomas Cromwell, who was a really influential politician at the time. This one was really hard to get through. It was dense, often very boring. I don't understand the hype at all. I gave it 1 star. Then the last book I read in January was 1491, New Revelations of the Americas Before Columbus by Charles C. Mann. Oh no. This is a nonfiction novel. It details what America was like before Columbus and European colonization. And it kind of debunks a lot of myths. Like, it talks about how America was a lot more populated, a lot more technologically advanced than is commonly discussed. This was really valuable to read. It's become one of my favorite nonfictions that I've read so far, and I give it 5 stars. In the month of February, I read 4 books, the first of which was Under the Dome by Stephen King. Basically, an invisible dome seals off a small town from the rest of the world. I like this book. I think it was a little bit too long, and it wasn't the best that I've read from Stephen King. I gave it 3 stars. After that, I had to read an entire book for school, which was The Politics of Inequality, a political history of the idea of economic inequality in America, which is by Michael Thompson. I mean, the title is self-explanatory. It was kind of boring. I had to read it. I gave it 3 stars because it was kind of an interesting premise, even if the writing was not the best. Then next, I read another book for one of my classes last semester, which was Abortion Politics by Z. Munson. This book was a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be. It kind of gives a history of the abortion debate in the United States throughout time, and it really shows how abortion used to be thought of differently and how different political groups have used the idea of abortion to rally support for their cause throughout time. Really, really interesting and really short, well written, definitely worth a read. I gave it 4 stars. Then the last book I read in February was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I love V.E. Schwab, I was so excited about this. Basically, this follows a young woman who made a deal with the devil so that she could live forever, but on the flip side, she has to be forgotten by everyone she's ever met. I love this so much. I can't pretend that, like, my opinion isn't biased because I love V.E. Schwab, but I gave it 5 stars. And then next, we head into March, in which I read 6 books, the first of which was Wild Beauty by Anna Marie McLemore. This book is a little bit hard to describe. It's young adult magical realism. It follows a family of women who can magically grow flowers, but they are also cursed so that any person that they fall in love with dies tragically or disappears. This book was a little slow. Towards the end, I really liked it once I figured out what was going on, but the writing is really beautiful. I do think it's worth a read. I gave it 3 stars. So the next book I read was Black Prophetic File by Cornel West, and it's also in conversation with Krista Buschendorf. I'm sorry, I'm not German, I can't say that. Basically, this book talks about 6 different revolutionary black leaders. Most of them were prominent during the Civil Rights Movement, but not exclusively. They talk about people like MLK and Malcolm X, and then they talk about why the Black prophetic fire isn't as strong today. This was such a good read. I highly recommend this to anyone, especially people who want to learn more about Black revolutionary thought. I give it 5 stars. I think it's a really good introduction to that topic. After that, I read Dig by A.S. King. This has a really nice cover, I really love it, but it's also, again, another very hard book to describe. It's young adult, and it basically follows like 5 teens who are having a really rough time in life, and eventually their stories come together. I don't want to say more than that because I feel like I didn't really understand that in the beginning, so I'm going to leave it right there. There are also some magical elements thrown in. I think this book was really unique. I liked it a lot and I gave it 3 stars. After that, I read Exit West by Mohsin Hamid. This book was really surprising. It had been sitting on my shelf for a while. Basically, you're following people who are just starting a relationship when their country breaks out into civil war, and then at the same time, portals begin popping up across the globe. This one was super good. It was really short but really engaging. I gave it 4 stars. Then I read another book for school, which was called Inequality in America, Race, Poverty, and Fulfilling Democracy's Promise, which was written by Stephen Caliendo. As you can see, there was a common theme. I took a class on inequality last semester. This book was just a brief overview of inequality. It really touched on how inequality is present in like all different facets of life. This book was fine. It was kind of at an introductory level, and I feel like a lot of political science students would have been well aware of most of the main themes in this already about how inequality is present in so many different facets of life, but maybe that's just because that's an area where I'm very interested in. I gave it 2 stars. And the last book that I read in March was A Kick in the Belly, Women, Slavery, and Resistance by Stella Dadzzi. This book was really good. It kind of discusses the role that women played in developing a culture of slave resistance. I think this is also a really valuable read. I gave it 4 stars. Then in the month of April, I read only 3 books. The first was another one from my classes. It was White Collar Government, The Hidden Role of Class in Economic Policy Making by Nicholas Carnes. This one was one of my favorites that I read for that inequality class. It basically just talked about how US government is dominated by the economic elites. That's the main thesis. It was really good, really interesting. I gave it 4 stars. Then I made a huge mistake and I picked up The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett? I'm not gonna pretend I know. This is another really big popular book in historical fiction and I hated it. I hated it so much. It's supposed to be about like a guy who really wants to build a cathedral, but it's just so misogynistic unnecessarily. I hated it. I could not get through the entire thing. I gave up. I gave it 1 star and I can't wait to get rid of this. Then the last book that I picked up in April was Vengeful by V.E. Schwab. This is the sequel to Vicious. And Vicious basically follows these 2 college roommates who are not enemies, but in college they had discovered that extraordinary abilities can result from near-death experiences, so now they're both kind of like, they both have different superpowers and they're enemies. It's a whole thing. That was a terrible description, but I think you get what I mean. Again, I love V.E. Schwab. It had been years since I read Vicious, but I really easily got into this. Definitely worth a read. I gave it 4 stars. Then in the month of May, I read 7 books, the first of which was another one for school. I'm sorry, I have to include them because I read all of them. But that book was Unequal America, Class Conflict, the News Media, and Ideology in an Era of Record Inequality by Anthony DiMaggio. To put it simply, this book just talks about Americans and their beliefs about the class divide in the United States. There were a lot of really interesting insights in here, and I did like this, and I'm happy that I can actually have a physical copy. I give it 4 stars. After that, I picked up Journey to the End of the Night by Céline. I don't know, what's his first name? I don't know, it's not here. His name's on the back. Louis Ferdinand Céline. I'm definitely not saying that right. First off, I just want to say I bought this because of the cover, and I did not read the back, and I should have read the back, because it turns out author, huge piece of shit. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. But basically, this book follows the story of like a French guy in World War I and then to Africa, to the United States, and back to his life in Paris as a failed doctor. There's really not much that goes on plot-wise in this novel. It's really nihilistic, really angsty. I did like the writing style in some aspects, but at the same time, it kind of just got really boring and just on and on and on in parts and really ranty. So I ended up giving it 3 stars, but again, author's a piece of shit, so I'm just putting that out there. Then I picked up The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. I remember this book was really popular when it came out, and it won the Pulitzer Prize, so that makes sense. This book reimagines the Underground Railroad as a literal underground railroad, and then it follows the story of a slave girl named Cora as she escapes and how her life proceeds from there. I did like this. I think the writing wasn't fully for me, but credit where credit is due, this was still a great book. I gave it 3 stars. Then I picked up one of my favorite books so far, Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. I hate this cover that I have. I got it online for really cheap. But don't look at this, because it in no way reflects how good the book is. This is a science fiction novel that takes place in 2025, which 4 years away, so that's great, but it reimagines America. It doesn't reimagine, that's how America actually it is. But in this novel, the US is suffering from severe water shortages, also other things such as disease and heightened drug use, and everyone's just struggling to stay alive, basically. And it follows a young girl named Lauren, who's confronting this world, and also is kind of starting her own religion, which isn't the main focus of it, but it's definitely in there. I think this book was so good, so good. It's really important to read because it deals a lot with ideas about climate change and where we're headed, but also it's such a good read. It's really engaging. I got really into it, and it's something that I've thought of ever since. Like, basically every time it rains, I think about how lucky I am. Needless to say, I gave it 5 stars. I loved this. Then I picked up The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. This is a book that I actually have read partially for school, but I wanted to read it all the way through so that I could really understand the material. Basically, this book gives a history of how the United States government segregated America, whether it be like a local government, state, federal. They all played an active role in perpetuating segregation. And I know I keep saying this with all the nonfiction books I mentioned, but this book is so important. This is definitely something that everyone should read because I think it's really important. It shows how Black people in America have really been purposely left out of every wealth building opportunity, and I think in that way it really makes a case for reparations, although reparations aren't a main topic of the novel. I think he mentions at the end, but it's not a major theme. This book's so important, I gave it 5 stars. I highly recommend this one. And we have the last book on here that I read for school, The Good Food Revolution, Growing Healthy Food, People and Communities by Will Allen. This book is kind of a memoir, kind of not. Basically, the author Will Allen shares his story of how he built this really influential urban farm. This book's so cool though. I was taking a class on food systems and it was really depressing in a lot of ways. But this book gives you a lot of hope for the future, and it shows how interesting the politics of food can be. I was really into this actually. It's really easy to read as well. I gave it 4 stars. Then, the last book I read, I don't know why I'm doing this, the last book I read in May was Moonglow by Michael Chabon. The book was really emotional for me because basically the author is sharing the story of his grandfather's life, and this was a story he was told on his grandfather's deathbed. The plot really jumps around, like, you'll get stories about his grandfather in World War II, which takes on a whole nother level because his grandfather is also Jewish, but then you'll also get stories of his grandfather meeting his grandmother and his grandmother's severe mental health issues, but then these are also interspersed with, like, his grandfather on his deathbed, or even, like, his grandfather in the last year of his life. It was slow towards the beginning, but it really picked up, and his grandfather lived such an interesting life. It was also just very sad because you read this man's story with the full knowledge of his death, and like all of us died, but it was still so sad for me. The grandparents thing is really a personal trigger, but I ended up giving this 4 stars. And then we hit last month, which is June. I only read the 3 books, so that's why I didn't make a wrap-up specifically for June. But the first book I read in June was Fever 1793 by Laurie Halse Anderson. This book is a YA. It deals with the yellow fever outbreak in Philadelphia in 1793. I did like it, but you could definitely tell that it was an early YA. Like, YA has advanced a lot within the last few years, and this one reads kind of more like a middle grade, but I did still like it, and I learned a lot about the yellow fever outbreak in Philly, and it was really interesting to me, and I ended up giving it 3 stars. After that, I picked up Are Prisons Obsolete by Angela Davis. I already had high expectations going into this, and she completely delivered. She addressed everything so eloquently, and she made such a good case for prison abolition. I highly recommend this, and it's a really small little book, so you have no excuse not to pick it up, is all that I'm saying. I gave this 5 stars. And the last book I read in June was The Overstory by Richard Powers. I don't even know how to describe this book. I guess you're following like a big cast of characters as they develop like an intense relationship with trees in some way, and then eventually they all come together and take part in political activism. This book was really long, and it just went on and on and on in instances where it shouldn't have, in my opinion. I was really excited for it because the boy babysit actually gave it to me, and they wrote like a little thing in here, and it was so sweet, but I only gave it, I think I gave it 2 stars. I was not feeling it. And there you have it. Those are all the books that I've read so far in 2021. I'm hoping to pick up the pace for the second half of the year, because for me, 30 books isn't that much. But regardless, there it is. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye!